Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com and the Big Four Accounting Firms YouTube channel. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody to support us if you have a chance or if you can. Even $1 helps, and we have a link in the description to a website called Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to donate to us and support us. Again, any amount is helpful so that we can keep putting out content. And there's also other ways for you to support us in the show notes to this podcast or on YouTube in the description.
Today I wanted to talk about the most motivating thing in the Big Four accounting firms. This is what gets everything done, and this is what ultimately dictates everything within the Big Four accounting firms, and that is the deadline. Most Big Four accounting firms engagements start out really well. Not all of them, but a lot of them start out really well with good intentions. Everybody's trying to audit everything down to the smallest number. They're trying to improve all the processes. The relationship with the client is really good until the deadline comes. And the deadline, I'm speaking about it in a weird manner here just because it is kind of weird. The deadline washes away everything. It makes everybody get things done. Obviously, it's a deadline. But I mean, all niceties go by the wayside once a deadline comes. Everybody trying to improve every process goes away when the deadline comes. And it really changes the way people are. But it also can highlight how good you are as a professional, depending on how you interact with the deadline. And a lot of time on engagements, people take it very lackadaisical. I've spoken about it here on before, but I remember I went to one training for project management, and this engineer showed us a Gantt chart and like how to properly plan a project. For engineers, it obviously makes a little bit more sense because they're typically building something and there's little components throughout it. But that's not necessarily true in a Big Four engagement. In a lot of audits, it is true, but it's still, people don't really follow it. And I mean, that's why you have a lot of these issues with audits. Because even though Big Four accounting firms try to standardize audits, they try to standardize work papers, they try to standardize audit databases, or even on a tax engagement, same thing. It doesn't necessarily happen. People skip pieces because they're familiar with it and they trust the client. Some people don't even know standardized work papers exist. But in this training that I went to, we tried to explain to the guy, yeah, we don't do that. We don't follow a Gantt chart. We don't plan it out step by step, week by week, day by day. And I'm sure some people do, so I understand that. But the more clients you have, and that's the ultimate goal of the Big Four accounting firms, is to stuff you with as many clients as you're capable of handling until you basically complain. All your best plans go by the wayside as soon as you get a piece of bad information. The client's delayed, and the client's always going to be delayed because they have things that they want to do, or maybe they're working on their work-life balance. But the deadline is what ultimately gets everything done. If there was no deadline, then the Big Four accounting firms would really get nothing done. People have so much spare time on audits. I mean, they don't have a lot of spare time, but people just run out the clock. They don't do anything until the last thing. And I mean, a lot of this has to do with procrastination, how procrastination is a really good motivator. But I was just thinking earlier today about how the deadline changes everything, because it seems like every year, it starts out great. People have the introduction calls, people have status calls. But as a deadline comes and the client gets more deadlines, the calls get worse. They get more heated. People cancel because they're so busy. But it's ultimately that deadline that'll make everything, it's the only way things get done. If there's no deadline, then engagements would be open for forever. People would be fine-tuning what is income, what's expense, how should this be categorized? Is this on the right entity? Does it belong over here? Was this transaction treated appropriately? How should we do this? Everybody has a deadline, and that's just something to remember. So, because I know a lot of people out there are probably perfectionists and they want to get everything perfect, but it's just not possible. You have to be cognizant of this deadline, the way the Big Four accounting firm works through the deadlines, because sometimes you'll be trying to get everything perfect and you just can't You just can't get it perfect. Not in enough time. But you have to remember that the deadline's going to come, and it's going to get done. And a lot of times it's going to get done sloppy. I guess that's what I'm saying from the perfectionist standpoint. And it might not be up to your standards. But that's not the way to get disenchanted, because a lot of things in the big four accounting firms aren't done to actually the best standards. I mean, we read headlines on here all the time about that, but it's not done to the best standards. But that's fine, and the better you deal with that and the things that come off of that, then the better positioned you are. Because a deadline's going to hit. Sometimes you're going to do things sloppy. You're going to have a restatement on an audit. It might be your restatement. It might be another firm's restatement. You're going to have missed something. The client's going to have an adjustment. This is all part of the big four accounting firms, and I think this is also another reason why big four accounting firms aren't really 100% invested in getting everything perfectly correct, and why they don't perfectly plan their engagements, and why standardized engagements aren't actually pushed across completely, and why you don't have extreme enforcement across big four accounting firms is because there is a lot of work that's won off of mistakes. And also a lot of the work that's done, and I've spoken about this in the past too, isn't reviewed. Some of it is reviewed by the PCAOB, by the FRC in UK, but a lot of it isn't. And same thing with taxing regulators, the IRS in the US and other places around the world. The taxing agencies don't review every single return. Some of them have automated things, but they don't review every single return. So there's no sense in getting everything perfect either. So that's another reason why things aren't perfect. But at the end of the day, it's the deadlines that really move things in the big four accounting firms, and it's good to work off of that. And it's also like a way to build your own working practice. Is you need to figure out your deadlines, work backwards from them. Try and pull your engagement team into working towards a deadline too. But if you see that your engagement team isn't really invested in deadlines, that's fine. Let them trip and fall, and you manage the engagement in the background, and just have a sketch pad idea of how you're going to get to the deadline. But you shouldn't be one of these people that is like a chicken with its head cut off, and like bumper cars, where you have to hit a bunch of stuff and then you stumble to the deadline. A lot of people do that, don't get me wrong, and like senior people too, like senior managers, directors, partners. A lot of them just live day to day, and they just stick around in the big four, and that's how they get promoted. But to me, that's not a good way to work, and that's not like a good way for younger people to work, is to hit every branch on the way down out of a tree. It's better to have a plan, work towards deadlines, and get things accomplished. Have a plan of how you're going to meet the deadline, what deliverables you need to get ready, what goals you need to hit before you get to that deadline. Make people aware, but also don't be a taskmaster and be like, this thing hasn't been done according to my plan. The client hasn't done this, so I'm going to throw the client under the bus and the people on my team under the bus. That never works. But the deadlines are important. That is how things get done in the big four accounting firms. Unfortunately, it's not. And I guess the alternative would be getting things done before a deadline, before a regulatory deadline. That's just not how the standard big four accounting firm project works. In my experience, in my many years of experience, and the people I've worked with, there are some engagements, like smaller engagements you might have, where you'll meet it before then. The other ones where you meet it before then is where the client really pushes to meet it before then. But a lot of times it's these hard deadlines, regulatory deadlines, and that really make things work the way they work. And it's just wanted to make people aware of that, so that they can understand a little bit better about how the big four accounting firms work, and like if other people out there are experiencing the same thing. Because I know that working in the big four accounting firms, if you're a goal-oriented person, if you're a perfectionist, can be very frustrating, because people don't really have a sense of urgency until they have to hit that deadline. But those are that's the podcast for today. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast to get future updates. Support us financially through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes if you can. And if you can't, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Big Four Accounting Firms.